All right. Awesome. Looks like we got people pouring in now. Seeing some familiar faces. Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us on this beautiful Friday. We're gonna we're gonna go through our topic, but we're gonna keep an eye on our time so we can make sure everybody can get out and enjoy the nice weather we have today. So just as our usual, our house rules for our webinar, we encourage everybody to keep your cameras on. It's always lovely to see everybody. Raise your hand when you want to ask a question, and we will unmute you. And feel free to ask questions throughout the entire presentation. We got Peter on board to sort of poke in there and to collect a couple of questions for us as we go through today's webinar. So without further ado, let me introduce who's going to be on it today. So today we're going to have Nick Rogacki, our creative director, as he's been on a couple of our webinars lately going through our topics. And today, because we're going so deep into web design and web development, we have Kiri, our senior website developer, joining us today. And then, of course, you have me, Dustin Bailey. You're our account director here at Anania Bailey. And we're just going to jump right into the subject so we can keep today moving, everyone. So the challenge today is to really take an assessment, of, is your website bad? And are there ways to improve it with intentional design? So we're going to go through a couple of different aspects of it today, thinking about design more than just the face of it, to really think about, essentially how you can improve those things, because websites are a huge investment. 75% of consumers admit to making judgments about a company's credibility based on a company's website. So it's a huge asset for your brand. And when every single time, whether you've just recently done a website project or considering one, it's a huge amount of resources and time and energy in money. So it's something that we take very seriously here, because whenever we're working on a web project, or whether it's going from the ground up, starting up a brand new website, or whether we're just making an adjustment or doing sort of a facelift, we're really thinking about, how are we going to be able to use design as that tool to help reach the goals of these of the businesses, organizations that we're working with. So I wanted to sort of stop before we go too far into it and really, sort of just get a little bit of an idea from the crowd today. So, what are some of the worst website experiences that you've had? Feel free to unmute and just jump in and just let us know. We're talking about your website is probably, your website's probably bad. What kind of bad websites have we experienced?
Non-mobile friendly websites.
There we go. First and one of our favorite.
Yeah, Kiri's nodding like preach. Yeah, we're going to talk about that more in a bit, but yeah, 85% of people are going to probably access your website on mobile. And so you got to design mobile first, man.
Yep. What else do we have? I know it's Friday and everybody's ready to call it, but what other bad experiences, what other bad design do we have we experienced?
This might sound a little funny, but any government website, if you've ever been on, they all look like they were built by scammers in the 90s.
Yeah.
Astute observation.
Preach it.
Yeah, I would say there's that. Also, anything that's like highly engineer oriented, I feel like when you find like really like big mechanical, sales companies, it feels very much the same. It's like here's an overly cropped, overly pixelated photo of only one dimension of like this giant industrial thing we want you to buy. It's kind of got the same vibe.
Yeah. So I mean, I think as we kind of go through today, we're gonna go and poke at a couple of different things, but those are some good ones for us to kind of think about as we step into it. So I'm gonna throw it over to Nick, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about what is intentional design.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as a creative director, like I would love to just wax poetically about fonts and colors and layout and composition. And I think they're going to give me an opportunity to do that later. But when we're talking about intentional design, it goes well beyond that, right? Intentional design is really about trying to figure out where user interactions are going to meet kind of product, app, websites, website usage, and considering how users are going to interact at each point of kind of that design. Essentially, it means that we're trying to decide how users want to use your website, how they want your website to work, and then how you want users to behave on your website. Those are kind of the two places, right? So we know some basic things. You know, users want your website to be clear. They want it to be responsive. They want it to be intuitive. You know, over 60% say that if they don't find what they're looking for in the first 5 seconds on your website, they're going to go somewhere else. So that intuitiveness is really important from the what users want. From the how users want to behave, every website that you've built in some way is you're trying to get that user to take an action. That might be do something, buy something, learn something. Intentional design is on every step of your design process, from the very foundational questions. You're trying to figure out what they need and what you want them to do, and then building that into the design. And sometimes that's functionality, and sometimes that's visuals and aesthetics. We're going to break down both of those. So I think it's probably best if we actually just jump right in and start considering some of those foundational questions first. What are the foundational things that you want to address? And Dustin, you tend to help people through some of these initial questions a lot, even when we're pitching, when we're kind of initially working through potentially new clients, right?
Yes, I was going to say these are usually the icebreakers. You know, whenever we're thinking about websites and we're thinking about web design, we really have to go to the very bottom and think about what are our foundational things that we need to have in order, because we're designing for X, we're designing for Y, right? Like there are outcomes that we want to be able to see from this. So, you know, this part doesn't require, you know, an agency or a web developer really to start. You know, you have to ask the bigger questions. You know, what are your user needs? You know, who are they? Understanding their core audience is key when you're trying to figure out how your website is going to be used, but also how they're going to be using it. You know, what are they looking for when they jump onto your website? What is the user behavior? Understanding, you know, that mix between where you want to take them and what they're actually doing on your website is really key. And these are the kind of questions you can ask yourself before you're ever sitting down thinking about, you know, doing your own work on your website or contracting an agency to sort of work with people on that. The second is really thinking about, you know, your objectives. You know, your website is a foundational marketing piece, you know, to your overall strategy and to your overall brand. So you use it as a tool. What are you trying to get people to actually do? You know, how does investing in your website, you know, reach those goals for your business or for your organization? You know, are you trying to get people to go and buy a product? Are you trying to get them to donate? Are you trying to get them to just, you know, obtain more information? How do you want this to be a resource and be a tool for your brand? And knowing where you need to take people is going to change your design, and really think about, especially at the very base level, how it needs to function. Isn't that right, Kiri?
And you said that perfectly. You know, once you kind of have an idea of your users and then what your business's goals are, you kind of have to take a step back and think, what does the website actually need to do? Because there are practical things that need to happen. If you're a business that sells things, you're going to need e-commerce. You might need different integrations for that. So really, you know, honing in on your goals, your users, and then what needs to happen on the website is a really big part of the foundational setup. A good kind of example, if we want to continue. So this is the Burpee Seeds website, and it's not special, it's not fancy visually, maybe not the flashiest website, but this is clearly well thought out in the foundational questions. If you look up at the top, there is a little zone 5. So if the objective of this website is to get people to buy seeds, things they need to know are what kind of vegetables can they grow where they live. And adding this geolocation and displaying their growing zone right in the header adds value for the user and helps them, you know, go through and complete a purchase and complete your goals and their goals.
Kiri, who designed this website?
I don't know. Wasn't me.
Yeah, no, I wasn't sure if you knew offhand, because that's a really good point that we're going to talk about more. Sorry, I didn't mean to break you up. Yeah, let's keep going.
No, you're fine. So once you kind of laid your foundational questions, it's time to kind of dig in and think about the overall like structure of your website. So part of that its keyword buzzword is information architecture. But what that means essentially is what are the goals of your website and how can you structure your content to achieve those goals? Part of that is establishing navigation or a sitemap. This should be really intuitive for your users. If there's ways to categorize pages, do that. But you want to make sure everything flows and that the most important information is easily accessible. Once you kind of have your sitemap established, it makes sense to kind of dig in and map out the actual pages of that sitemap. Things you can do in this step are maybe plan out headings, think where you're going to, organize content and things. Think about keywords and subheadings and how you're going to structure the pages so that you have kind of a overall idea of how your website's flow is going to be. This is also a good step to think about what you don't want users to do. Are there actions you don't want them to take? Are there things you want to discourage? A good example, we're working on a website for a restaurant right now, and they don't really want people to pick up the phone and call them. They have an online reservation system. They want people to use that. So while we were structuring the site, we were like, how can we place calls to action? How can we structure the flow so people are more likely to reserve than click the contact us and pick up the phone and call them?
That's a huge part, I think, of how you can think about how you incorporate your brand into your feature set as well. We're going to talk more about design and content in a second, but figuring out where kind of use case scenarios really match well with structure is a great way to incorporate brand. A really common one that we run across here in Maine is a lot of people are working with, I would say, seniors, folks who are a little bit older in the state. Estate planning is a really good one. A lot of people do estate planning. We've been working with a couple of different law firms there. And some of the things there's like, you want to make sure that the text is large enough for, this particular community to be able to easily access and read. You also want to make sure that that navigation is intuitive and has some features that really speaks to the audience, a little bit like the burpee seeds that we're looking at. But in this case, something to keep in mind is when we're talking about like estate planning right now for, the boomer generation, we're talking about a generation that has never been digital natives. And so you don't necessarily need to say, this is the training and interface that everybody expects. They expect the hamburger menu indicator, and that's what they'll click on to go through. This is a space where you can say like, well, what are the usual ways that this generation has been navigating content for 60 years? And you can even look to other organizational principles like newspapers or magazines as a way of making this feel really intuitive, even if it's a little different from the normal interface, to kind of allow that to go through. And that's another way to kind of telegraph brand personality too. Whether you're trying to be competent or fun or clever or accessible, you can do that with some of the ways that you build out these features. And then the last thing that you want to be aware of when we're talking about features and branding is really where do you have features that can highlight your company's values, right? If you're committed to community relationships, then you probably want to have some sort of feature that allows you to highlight all of your community partners. If you're really committed to clarity, which you should be, having something that helps, having an easy zoom feature on a product page, or offering directions to somebody, or even just that kind of classic pop-up feature that we see in the corner. You've been on our webpage for a couple minutes. Can we help you find anything? Those sort of features help to underscore your brand voice and your brand identity, while still keeping it away from what colors you're using or whether your logo is all over the page. So that's something that's really helpful to keep in mind. I want to take a minute and do kind of a little other audience participation thing here. I'm curious how many of you believe people are actually reading your website. I think that we've all got different reference points here. We can do a show of hands if we want, but I'd love to get a sense of how many of you people actually read your website, and also, do you actually read websites when you visit them? Are you actually taking the time to read the About Us page or the intros? Feel free to chime in, guys. I'm really curious where you think this lives.
I'm just starting to get into this, and I'm always looking at my work's website to see if there's anything that needs to be updated or anything, but that has started me looking at other people's websites and doing the about and kind of really digging through it now that I'm doing it for work.
Okay, so kind of gun to your head for employment purposes, you started to read people's stuff. Anybody else casually? Do you think people read yours? Do you read others? Heather, I see you shaking your head no. Got it. All
I
right.
feel like it depends on the website. Like for me, if I'm going to Apple's website to like look at a computer or whatever, I'll probably just use the top navigation real quick and go like to Macs and then MacBook Pro and then buy now. And you're all of a sudden you're on the page where it shows you the specs and you're ready to buy it. And it's not really that interesting. But if I'm looking at like a small like local craftsman from Maine's page and I want to learn more about them and where they're from and how they got into boat making or whatever it is, I definitely would look a lot more closely at their website and the About Us page and all the stuff that's going on.
Got it. No, I think that makes sense, and this all tracks with what we've learned from kind of behavioral studies here. So, you know, if we can jump to the next slide. First off, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the visual look and feel. This is where we're going to get into how design and content meets kind of the intentional design that we're talking about. It takes on average people 50 milliseconds to form an opinion about your website, and that opinion is going to determine whether they stay or go. We've been talking a lot about functionality and organization and how important that is to keeping people on your website, making your website effective. But the visuals are really it's the gatekeeper. Aesthetics will get people in the door, and then functionality will keep them there. So I'm going to kind of fight back with Kiri for a moment to say that functionality is super important, but you can't even really get there unless you've got a little bit of pretty at the front end. The other thing that's really fascinating is users spend 5.94 seconds looking at the main image on a web page. We all do this. We're all guilty of this, right? We spend 5.97 seconds on average reading all of the copy on that homepage. So the importance of visuals that telegraph your brand, that telegraph your quality, are huge. They're 0.03 seconds less important than all the copy on your page. It's really important to get those visuals right, particularly above the fold, which is to say the first kind of piece that loads when you first get on the website. And people like large, crisp images. I'm saying this a little bit because, like, I know everybody has a cell phone in their pocket and they can all take a photo on their cell phone. And I think for some people, they think that makes them a photographer. And in some cases it does. Everybody's an artist until someone tells them they're not. But people like crisp images, and image quality makes a huge impact on whether someone's going to stay and keep their attention on your site. 95% of people say that if they go on a website and the photos look blurry, out of focus, pixelated, they will immediately leave because it feels like a scam. Or it feels like the people who built the site aren't professional enough or competent enough to do anything else, to be trusted for anything else. So photography plays a really big role here, which I think can be surprising to people, but I'm going to hammer that a little bit. The second thing I want to talk about a little bit is using your website as a funnel. I've got here, it's a trap. There's a lot of ways that we understand how people behave that allow us to build a website as a funnel. One thing is that the top left corner is where we all start. People talk about the F viewing when you get on a website. That top left corner is where we're all start looking first, and we kind of make our way through and then land on what's called the terminal area, which is the bottom right. So you see this repeated in a lot of web design anyway. Your logo should probably be in the top left corner. So the first thing somebody sees is your branding right there. And then your call to action should be in that bottom right corner. Whatever action you want them to take. Learn more, buy now, see products, whatever the call to action is on that homepage, that's where that should belong. Probably a good time to also mention that 70% of small businesses do not have calls to action on their homepage. Please don't be a statistic, guys. Calls to action are really important. Your homepage is the most visited page on your website. The best way to meet, like we were talking about before, your visitors' expectations and your hope to drive their behavior is to have a call to action on the homepage. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about copy and SEO and branding. SEO, I'll break this down really quickly. Search engine optimization. It includes any number of things. A lot of us think about search engine in terms of copy. It includes meta tags. It includes alt tags, data for what photos look like, etc. For a long time, SEO was all about keyword stuffing. If I'm selling tubs, I want to use the word tub every single time I can in a page. That's not the case anymore. The days of keyword stuffing are gone. Websites will rank well for selling tubs, even if they don't mention tubs 100 times more than their competitors. In fact, they're going to perform even better when it's clear that your website is knowledgeable, that when you're talking about tubs, you're talking about bath fittings, you're talking about size, you're talking about finishes, porcelain, tile, etc. All of those things are going to make your website perform better and rank higher, and also ensure that the copy you're writing actually fits kind of what your brand voice is and is clear to the people who are on your page. So when we're talking about what actually goes on your page in terms of copy, that's a big aspect of that. The other thing here that I want to make a point of, because I've been talking a long time and Kiri's smarter than I am, so I'm going to throw to her in a minute, is the chief thing to remember here is that clarity always trumps persuasion. So when you're thinking about your website, how you structure stuff, where you're putting content, you always want to err on the side of being clear about what you're selling, what you're talking about, the point you're trying to make, than trying to convince somebody about it. Because when someone has a clear understanding of the decision or the product or the features, they're going to convince themselves. We have all visited the same website 8-9 times because that dress would just look so much better than that other dress. If I look at it one more time, do I still really like it? Or how those skis or. We do that a lot because we're going back, convincing ourselves. A website that functions well and is clear will do most of the legwork for you and is always better than trying to sell somebody on something. That's all huge. Of course, none of this is valuable if your SEO is ranking low because it's not accessible, or if you're not reaching the audiences you want because you haven't thought about accessibility. This is a huge issue, and I think one that Kiri can speak to really eloquently.
So accessibility is honestly a huge issue right now, particularly because there are a lot of lawsuits happening for inaccessible websites. I think when most people think accessibility, they don't necessarily think it as a design issue, but it's way more than just functionality. 75% of Americans with disabilities use the internet on a daily basis. And the most common accessibility issues aren't functionality issues, but visual ones. Low contrast text is actually the biggest offender. Essentially, the text and the background, it's difficult to read or illegible. So when you're thinking about the visuals of your website and the overall like aesthetic design, it's really important to think, is this going to work for not just my target audience, but for everyone? And there are some ways that you can accommodate for that I don't know that I need to get into. It's kind of technical, but there are things to consider when you're thinking design. Colors, a big one. The contrasting can be, accommodated for within the code, but you might need to think, okay, I want to use this color on the website, but it doesn't meet accessibility guidelines. Is there an alternative? Is there a way to incorporate this that is accessible? It lets you kind of think of alternative ways to present your content and alternative ways for users to interact with your content and your site to make sure that it's accessible across, a wide range of devices for a wide variety of users with a wide variety of abilities. But it's not just like physical disabilities that you need to consider when you're talking about accessibility. Depending on your target audience, you may need to consider cognitive abilities. Nick mentioned earlier, seniors, they're not as tech savvy as we all are. So you may need to have clearer calls to action, higher contrast, content that's a little easier to digest. You might need to break things down a little more just to make sure that your users can access your content, your website, and really achieve the goals that you're after for them.
Yeah, and I think it's important to close out to kind of decide, as we've been talking about a lot of these things, decide if your website is bad or not. We started this title with your website is probably bad. And we actually saw some pushback. Some people kind of took exception to that title a little bit. And the reason why we put it out there kind of confidently is 82%, according to Google, 82% of all of the websites online have been abandoned. And that their concept of abandoned just means hasn't been upgraded or updated in some amount of time, doesn't reach a certain number of visitors on an annual basis, so they believe that it's been abandoned. There's a lot of websites that are still considered active by their owners, that are still considered active by the companies who have them, that Google believes have been abandoned. And that's, I think, a good indicator that there's a lot of websites out there that are so bad that they look like ghost towns. And so I think we want to kind of end this a little bit on talking about sort of how you can diagnose your site and decide whether your site is bad or whether it just needs a little bit of a facelift. Dustin, what do you think the baseline is for us?
Well, the baseline, I always say, and especially when it comes around anything web related, is, does it work? If it's not functioning, if it's breaking, if it's crashing, or if there's clearly like whole pieces to the site that are no longer working, it could be a variety of different things. We work on WordPress, so we find it very common that a plugin is usually, or a certain part of a theme is no longer working. We're actually working on one project right now where essentially that is the case for their hosting. They can't fully update their website, and it is essentially going down the slow, icy hill until it just eventually will no longer work. So, that's kind of where you have to start with your design, looking at it as much more than an aesthetic and as a full tool, is really thinking like, okay, is my website fully functional? If it's not functioning, immediately it's like, it's time to do some work on it. Now is the time to start asking those foundational questions. Now is the time to start asking like, okay, we're already making some time and money and energy in the investment of trying to fix part of this. What else can you do with it? And that is the moment in time where you can maximize this, for your organization, for your business, to make sure that this tool, which is extremely valuable or should be extremely valuable, is starting to produce those results. Kiri, what's a little bit about being a resource?
So Nick actually said it earlier, clarity trumps persuasion. Users like websites that are easy to navigate, and it just adds to your business's credibility and authority to have a website that people can actually use. In fact, 89% of consumers will leave a website and go to a competitor if they can't find what they're looking for or have a bad experience. So when you think of, are you a resource? Are you kind of the go-to? Navigation is super important. And the key to a good user experience is making sure that your website functions really well and is usable. Another part of that, which was mentioned earlier, is it mobile friendly? Is it mobile first even? Everybody has a computer in their pocket, and most people are viewing the web on their phone. And 57% of users won't recommend a business that has a bad mobile experience. It doesn't look good to have a website that doesn't work well on phones. So if your website isn't, mobile friendly, if it's broken, I actually encountered one a couple of days ago on my iPad that was completely broken, big cosmetics brand. So, if it's broken on mobile, if it's not working, that it's not a good sign.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, right? When Kiri shared it kind of like with the agency as a whole, and you were on your iPad too. So like, not, also thinking like it has to be able to size, like it's not just got to be able to have it for phone or for desktop. Like there is a variety that you have to be able to hit when you're thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Dustin, the results are a huge aspect of what you talk about too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And out of everything that we're kind of talking about today, like we've had a lot of conversations about, with people about their websites, and it's always generally goes back to, it being that foundational piece of their strategy, for their brand, for their marketing, for their business or organization. So you need to make sure that it's something healthy to check in, every so often, to think about like, is this tool, really aligned with achieving the goals that your brand is setting out, on a annual basis, on a quarterly basis. We've encountered so many businesses right now that are, cutting back their budgets and trying to make sure that they're really spending wisely this, in this year, but they have very bad foundations. They don't have good websites. They don't have the right kind of content to bring the, the users that they want to the conclusion that they're trying to get them to. So it's something good to keep in mind as we're kind of looking over each one of these aspects.
And then I think the last one, and of course, I'm going to be the one to bring this up. The last thing that you want to consider in that diagnostic is like, is it ugly? Is it old? Not purely because I'm a kind of a design diva about these things, but this is, and Greg unfortunately offered a very insightful comment in the chat that kind of beats me to this, but your website, it does two things. It's either a conversation starter. It either kind of serves to kind of be that storefront for you, or it reaffirms what people believe you to be. We spend a lot of time working on networking, whether that's digital, virtual, getting leads, having conversations in person, handing over business cards. And it kind of, no matter how great that conversation goes, someone's going to go to your website. And if your site doesn't match the commitment to value or commitment to quality or competency that you or members of your team have been able to put forward in those personal conversations, it feels like a con. People are going to move away from it. We're all inherently risk averse online. We've all been kind of taught, either directly or indirectly, being burned or just being a little nervous, that you have to be very careful about what websites you're on, whether you trust what people are doing, whether is this the actual brand? Is this an AliExpress off brand? Is it like, what am I dealing with here? And having a website that's outdated suggests that it's abandoned, or it suggests that you don't have a commitment to quality. There is no aspect of your branding that is going to be seen or judged more than your website. And that's above and beyond your logo. That's above and beyond the business cards you hand out. That's more than the packaging when people receive your products. All these things are really important. Your website is getting more traffic, more views, it's being quietly judged. And it's not going to help you close a deal, or it's not going to help you necessarily, convert somebody to a different way of thinking. But it will prevent them from exploring those ideas or exploring those products further. So you really need to think through whether this is not only ugly or old, because ugly and old is bad from a web perspective, but because it's outdated, is it still an accurate representation of who your brand is or who you are? So it's one of those like hard come to Jesus kind of conversations that you need to have with yourself sometimes. But taking a look at what your website looks like, what it looks like compared to others in the industry, or even if your whole industry is a little outdated, but what this looks like compared to what people have grown accustomed to see on with other industries or other web pages. That's a big part of it. That's kind of the end of the big diagnosis thing. Before we kind of close out, though, I'd be really curious to get a sense of which of these kind of are resonating with people the most. Are we thinking enough about the results that we're getting, or tracking bounce rates and conversion rates on pages? Do we have that metadata? Have we been tolerating bad websites for a long time? Have we even really considered the resource question, or the first impression that your websites get? What diagnostics here maybe have we not thought about as much, or was this like a preach moment? You're like, yes, I've been saying this to executive management for years. I'd be curious what really resonates with people. Or nothing. Nothing resonates.
No, apparently not today.
Yeah,
Nick,
Fridays are tough.
Hey Nick, I have a question for the team. Where do we see the line between what are these items in do we see nonprofits struggle a little bit more with versus, is there a difference that we see with struggles of nonprofits versus for-profit organizations when it comes to these items and designing their website?
I've got one that comes to mind. I'm curious if you agree, Kiri, or if I'm going rogue. I think a structure and hierarchy is a really big deal here. I think that nonprofits expect that by and large, the people are going to read the content on their page, which they mostly don't. But the other thing is that, being really clear about what your subhead is, what your header is, making sure that you only have one idea per paragraph. that stuff's really important because everybody's scanning pages. And I think that because most people who are working with cause-driven organizations or nonprofits, on some level of that spectrum are kind of true believers. All of that information feels interesting. All of those data points feel relevant. There's a lot of ideas to get out. And I think a lot of these pages kind of lack the structural discipline to like be easily scannable by a visitor and really stick to the like, here's the one idea we want in this paragraph. Here's the one message we want to get through in these sections. Because a lot of them will open up with, climate change is hugely important. And a lot of people are ignoring climate change. We need to take action to deal with climate change. And the best way to do that is X, Y, and Z. And all of that is in one paragraph. And it's really tough because you need to sell people on the value proposition before you talk about the action, before you talk about primary challenges. Those things broken up make it a lot easier to be clear rather than persuasive. I think that's kind of my big one. I don't know. Kiri, is that tracking?
No, I mean, I would definitely agree. There is always with nonprofits a little bit of like mixing of messages. Everything does seem important. So it's hard to kind of cherry pick what should and shouldn't be there. But I think just personally in my own work with nonprofits, where they tend to get a little stuck is the calls to action, honestly. Making it clear what to do on the website. So many of them are informational, but also so many nonprofits, they thrive on donations, and a lot of those come through the web. I'm working with an organization that I actually had to convince to put a donate button on their homepage because they were like, no, we can't ask. It's really kind of a balance of like, what's your content? What's your goal as a nonprofit? What are your users looking to do? And I think there's just this, as you mentioned, like there's just so many things that seem important, but I think they also kind of struggle to see the website as a resource and how they can use it to actually help their cause.
Yeah.
I'd say
Go ahead,
the one thing that I always find, and I find it for both for-profit and non-profit, but I definitely see it a lot in the non-profit spaces, is really gearing certain things around audiences. And I think that's a kind of a good example of like your call to action lining up with partnerships versus the services you provide. Or, I feel like it's very common, and I think we can all of us who have worked on a website here at the agency can kind of agree that like sometimes it's hard to get people who are looking to invest in their site to sort of take a step away from their experience of the site and really get them to understand the experience of others jumping on their site. So I think that always ends up being one of the challenges I see in the nonprofit space, is that they like it, they love the information that's on it. It feels like it's just like their strategy document that they made 5 months ago before they decided to do this website, but it's not resonating, and it's too many pills to swallow on one web page and paragraph to actually like be effective for what they want it to actually be.
Does that kind of track with other people's experiences too? Has anybody been working in that nonprofit space and done what Kiri's done? Please, you can ask for money. It's okay. It's all right. Seeing a couple of nods. Anyhow,
Yeah.
Craig.
Is anyone familiar with the term customer centricity, which is a fancy way of saying the power of you? And I think a lot of folks, like Dustin was just saying, that it's all about them and pushing their information out into the world. But I think a more effective, just in my experience, a more effective way to get engagement in your website and to get people to do what you want them to do is to put them at the center of the conversation, right? People don't want the thing that you're selling. They want the feeling that the thing gives them, right? So if you can tap into that feeling, or just put yourself in their shoes and ask yourself, why are they coming to the website? What do I need as a customer? What do I need to know, like, and trust the person behind the website, or know, like, and trust the business, or understand that they're an authority in their field. I think if you take everything on your website that has the word we, every sentence that has the word we in it, you rewrite it as you, I think it really opens a lot of people's eyes as to what customer centricity is, and just the power of you and the power of engaging people in by using you instead of we, that point of view.
I mean, absolutely. And then that's something that like I know I think about when I'm like actually designing. You know, and I think so organizations maybe don't think about this is it's not your personal taste and what you want or what your organization wants is very important, but if it's not, you know, tailored to your user and meeting their goals, it's not going to be effective. So absolutely.
Indeed. I know we've had a couple of good insights, some great questions. So I know we're kind of running into our time. Does any other questions or insights or you know bad web experiences people have had that they want to share? Everyone's throwing in the towel. We're done. It's Friday. It's nice out. All right. Well, I was going to say thanks for joining us today. You know, I think as we've kind of gone through everything, you know, understanding that design is much more than just looking good or bad. It really is a tool that needs to be utilized to make sure you have a successful website. So if you want to continue the conversation, you want to complain about websites, you have something that, you know, you want to think about how intentional design can kind of help you out. As always, we have my information right here. You can always have a conversation with me in August and we can kind of go from there. But otherwise than that, everybody, thank you for joining us today. And I hope everybody gets to go out and enjoy this beautiful weekend.